Yo ho ho, welcome back to another video. So today I am so jazzed because I'm going to be doing my Christmas book haul, and if you know me, you know I don't do book hauls very often, so they're very special whenever I do get the chance to do them. So I've got a nice big warm mug of tea right here, and I hope you do too, because this is going to be a long one. This is going to be the biggest book haul I've ever done on my channel in like the last 7 or 8 years that I've been doing this. I've got 25 books to talk you through. I've broken them down into genre, so I'm going to be starting with classics, then getting into some horror, some fantasy, some sci-fi. I've got some translated works, and then I'm going to be finishing it off with some non-fiction. So I feel like I've got a really good eclectic mix of books to talk about and to read in the new year, and I'm really jazzed. So let's get into it. So the first book I have is The Black Tulip by Alexandre Dumas. Now, I read The Count of Monte Cristo earlier this year, and it was my second 5-star read of the year. I absolutely loved it. And when I was talking about it in my wrap up, a lot of people recommended The Black Tulip to me, saying that if you enjoyed The Count of Monte Cristo, this has a lot of similar themes, and it's kind of written in the same vein as Monte Cristo was, so you'll probably enjoy it. And if I can somewhat relive any bit of experience that I had while reading The Count of Monte Cristo, I'm going to take the opportunity to. And reading the synopsis of this, I have to agree with what people were saying about it. So this is about a man who's a tulip grower, and there's a competition to grow a black tulip because apparently they're very elusive and it's very hard to do. The only experience that I have with tulip growing is in Animal Crossings, and it's hard enough in that, so I'm going to assume that it's hard to do in real life. But naturally, this wouldn't be a Dumas novel if it wasn't for some sort of setup. So this tulip grower is actually falsely accused of something, and he ends up having to go to jail. Basically, it's just the story of this man who eventually does try to come through all his grievances in life and finally make this tulip happen. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Next, I have I Am a Cat by Natsume Soseki. So this is an author that I've been curious about for quite some time. And over the last 2 years or so, I've seen his works being recommended to me through YouTube, through Instagram, and I just feel like it's the universe telling me that I finally need to read him. And I put this on my wish list because the story just sounded kind of adorable to me. It's from the perspective of a little cat. And this cat just goes around and makes judgments, and it's basically like a social commentary on Japanese society. And I just think that sounds amazing. Like, the cat's called Mr. Sneeze. I believe he has some other little cat friends, and it's just talking about like the shenanigans that they get up to, and I just think that sounds incredible. Like, it is a little bit on the chunky side, but I feel like I'm gonna really enjoy this. Next, I have Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. So I read my first Thomas Hardy earlier this year, which was Far from the Madding Crowd, and I really enjoyed it. So I was eager to get more Hardy, because I've heard that after Far from the Madding Crowd, his work tends to get a good bit depressing, and I'm really here for that. I love sad, depressing, dark reads. So this is about a young woman named Tess who's estranged from her family. It sounds like she gets back into contact with them, and they're all sort of like these aristocrat, sort of rich people, quite snobby, and it sounds like she's just kind of forced into this world with people that are quite detestable. It seems like it has some similar enough themes to Far from the Madding Crowd, maybe not so much of a focus on the whole love aspect or potential suitor type of thing, but I think that this is going to be right up my alley because there's talk in the synopsis of like a dark secret is revealed, and I'm just here for a bit of family gossip, to be perfectly honest. Then I have Passing by Nella Larsen. So I have been wanting to read this for such a long time now, and I'm assuming that all the other editions of this book must have additional works, because this is only a short novella, and all the other books that I've seen have been upwards of like 300 pages or so. So I was quite surprised when I opened this up on Christmas morning, and I was like, there's nothing to it. But anyway, so this is set in Harlem in the 1920s, and it's about 2 childhood friends that get back in contact with each other as adults through letters. They are both mixed race women, I believe, but one of them finds out that the other one is married, but she's also passing for white within her marriage, and she lives off in Europe with her rich white husband. I would assume that this has devastating consequences. I'm expecting this to be quite eye-opening, and it will probably have a lot of things that we can still attribute to current times, because unfortunately not much has changed in the last 100 years or so. But I'm really interested to read this because Nella Larsen wrote this from the perspective of her herself being a mixed-race woman, and I'm assuming that it's just going to be a lot of talk on how, like, what it says about society in the whole terms of like the rise of Black people trying to pass for white in the 1920s. So I think this is going to be one that I'm going to read quite soon because I'm just so eager to get into it. Then I have The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. So my boyfriend got me this, and to be perfectly honest, it's been on my wish list for such a long time that I have no idea why I initially put it on there. I know that's not great, but someone must have talked about it and it probably sounded really juicy to me, because going through the synopsis again, I was like, this sounds pretty juicy. First of all, I have to say this book smells amazing, because I also got a load of bath bombs from my boyfriend too. So all the books that I got from him all just smell incredible. So yeah, I just feel more driven to read it if it smells nice. This is about another young woman who is trying to escape her past. It sounds like she moves into Wildfell Hall, and it sounds like she's, had some sort of an abusive relationship that's broken down, and she's just trying to get away from that and move on. But the local people start gossiping about her, and they completely misunderstand her, misrepresent her, and all that kind of thing. And I've never read any Anne Bronte. The only Bronte sister that I've still read is Emily. I've only read Wuthering Heights. And it's interesting because some people are like ride or die the Bronte sisters. They're like, everything the Bronte sisters is worth reading. Like you have to read all their books. And then there's other people who are like, Wuthering Heights is the only thing that's ever worth reading by any of them. The rest of them can just jump off a cliff for all I care. So I'm really interested to see, like, that might be a bit extreme, but I'm really interested to see where I fall and whether this is going to appeal to me. Like the amount of drama in this from the synopsis sounds like it's going to be something I like. It sounds like it's going to be one of those books that I read while eating popcorn and just being like, oh my God. Then I have Ulysses by James Joyce. So this is another one that my boyfriend got for me. And when he told me he'd bought this for me, I was like, oh, you shouldn't have. Really, you shouldn't have. I talk the talk on this channel, but to be perfectly straight up and honest with you, I was planning to procrastinate on reading this for a good 5 to 10 years. Like I was not mentally prepared to be getting this Christmas and to be reading it in the next year. But that's how things work. Sometimes you're thrown in the deep end. I have a bit of an intimidation to read this, but it's not based on my own views of Joyce's work. The only work that I've read by Joyce is Dubliners, and I really enjoyed that. So I didn't really have much of an issue with his writing style or anything. But a lot of American reviewers have kind of gotten into my head and really put me off reading this, because they talk about how difficult it is to read, how hard it is to understand and to follow, and that the sentences just go on and on. Like a lot of people struggle with Joyce's writing style, which is stream of consciousness. I kind of like stream of consciousness. That's how I write myself. So I'm expecting to have a completely different view on this. And also the fact that I know what Joyce is referencing, like the areas of Dublin that the characters travel through. I think I'm going to really enjoy that, because like that's why I like reading Irish stuff, because I'm like, I know what they're talking about. I've been there. So this all takes place on one day, and it's quite a busy day from the looks of it. But I think I'm going to try to read this over the summer. Send me good vibes. Like, I'm just going to go attack this with some good vibes. I'm not going to do the thing that I usually do with classics like this, where I tell myself that I'm too stupid to comprehend it, and I just continue to put it off, even though I'm more than capable than reading it. We're going to try to banish those sort of bad habits and bad thinking patterns this year. Next is Hangs a Man by Shirley Jackson. So this is one that I've had no clue what the plot was actually about until I got it as a gift, again from my boyfriend. Thank you very much, Rob. I want to read all of Shirley Jackson's work one day, and that's one of the goals that I'm kind of slowly but surely working through. So this is going to help me get there, but this sounds like it's going to be incredibly dark. So Shirley Jackson, one of the aspects that I love about her writing is that she tends to focus on mental health, especially mental health of young women. It's something that not only do I really relate to, but I just really appreciate, especially in the time that Shirley Jackson was writing these stories. So this is about a young woman who seems to have a bit of a volatile relationship with her parents. She ends up going off to college, but as a result of what she's been through, she ends up kind of living in her own head and creating this version of herself that she wants to be, and she ends up kind of personifying that, and ultimately it has quite a negative effect on her, because she ends up being invited to a party where she becomes the victim of a sexual assault. So right off the bat, that is probably like the darkest Shirley Jackson storyline that I've come across. And I just thought I'd mention that just as a heads up in case any of you are interested in reading it, but don't necessarily want to read about something like that, you know? This doesn't sound like the typical sort of gothic tale that I'm used to from Shirley Jackson, but it still sounds like something that I'm going to be really into reading. Next, I have The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. So this is an author that I've been curious about again for a while. I've had his other short story collection, The White People and Other Strange Tales, on my wish list for quite some time. And I can't remember how I initially came across this. I think it was like at some point last year, I was simply just looking through some of the Penguin English library books to see if there was any cheap sort of horror classics that I could get my hands on, and I came across this and I thought it sounded quite good. Basically, this is a ritualistic cult horror novella, and that's one of my all-time favorite subgenres of horror, but I pretty much only watch films about it. I don't really read about it, and that's something that I want to correct in the coming year. So from the sounds of it, it's about a young woman who has basically a bit of a dark cloud over her. A lot of people in her life end up having some sort of grievances, or they end up mysteriously passing away. So naturally, people start investigating this woman to see, why are the people around her randomly dying? Like, what is it? Is there something to do with her specifically? Is there something she's emitting? Is there something that she's doing to cause this? And it's just one of those nice paranormal tales. Next, I have The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. Now, this has been the most elusive book to me in 2020. I have tried multiple times to get my hands on this year. I've been at my local used bookshop and they told me it was out of print. And I was like, it's not out of print. I have tried to get it out of the library, and then the library emailed me to say, hey, we've got your book in. And then I go down to the library and they're actually closed because we were in a level 5 lockdown. I've just tried to get it multiple times, and every time it's like, no. So now that I actually have it, I'm like, oh, I'm so relieved. So I'm not mad keen into reading ghost stories. I've never particularly found them very scary. Like, I do like Shirley Jackson's ghost stories because I just like the atmosphere that she creates. But general ghost stories, I always find hard to read because I'm just like, is something happening? Is this exciting? Is this scary? I don't know. I've just never been a huge fan of that subgenre. However, so many people have recommended this to me over the years, and it's so like highly acclaimed within the paranormal horror genre that I'm like, I might as well give it a go. So I'm basing my opinion on whether or not I'm going to like this on the fact that like the film adaptation was really good. Haven't seen it, I wouldn't know. But supposedly it was really good. So if the film itself was good, the source material has to be way better. So this is about a young solicitor who goes to the estate of one of his clients who I believe has passed away in order to get their affairs in order. And when he gets to this house, he realizes that there's something not right, that it seems to be haunted. And even though this is completely ridiculous, he starts seeing this woman around the house, maybe glancing out of a window from time to time. That's all I can really tell from it. So I didn't want to spoil myself anymore. But yeah, I think this is going to be a bit of a fun read for me. Next, I have some more gothic goodness. I've got The Romance of the Forest by Anne Radcliffe. Now, when I made my gothic horror recommendations video back in October, so many people were shocked that Anne Radcliffe didn't make the list. And it's simply because I haven't actually read any of her work. So I plan to correct that in 2021. And this sounds like your stereotypical gothic trope sort of novel. Not complaining about that because it sounds amazing to me. It's about a young woman. I love reading about these young women, but it's about a young woman who is put into the protection of some other family. And it turns out this family is actually in a great amount of debt, and they end up having to flee Paris over fears because they can't repay this debt that they're in. So this young woman ends up hiding in some sort of ruined, dilapidated abbey. And there she finds the owner of the abbey, and he doesn't seem to be like the best person ever. Judging from what I know about the gothic genre, she's probably going to turn into some sort of damsel in distress, and it's just going to be great. There's certain elements in this that really speak to me that I just really enjoy reading about, just judging from like the synopsis on the back of the book. So I'm really looking forward to reading this at some point next year. And now to get into some more modern horror, I have The Song of Cali by Dan Simmons. I wanted to say Radcliffe so bad there. I read my first Dan Simmons book earlier this year, which was The Terror. And if you were following me then, you'd know I absolutely loved it. I thought it was brilliant. It was such a binge read despite the fact that it was over 900 pages long. Originally, I was thinking I wasn't going to like it at all. I didn't think that I'd really like the topic, which was like a bunch of men on this ship that's stranded in the middle of the Atlantic somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, basically, I loved it. So I was like, I need to read more Dan Simmons. And so many people recommended this to me. And so when I opened it up on Christmas morning, I was like, ooh, bitch. Again, this is more cult ritual sort of related horror, which I'm really looking forward to getting into. It's about a man who works at a literary magazine and he's sent out to Calcutta on an assignment. And when he's there, he ends up getting caught up in the activities of some sort of cult. And it just seems like it's going to be great. It seems like it's going to be another binge read for me, fingers crossed. Next, I have White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. So I don't know if I'm going to love this or not, because Helen Oyeyemi writes a lot of magical realism. And if you know me, you know that I'm really not a fan of magical realism. However, even though the plot of this sounds somewhat confusing to me, I've had so many people recommend it to me based on the fact that I really like witches and witchcraft and anything basically occult related. This seems to be about a house that holds some sort of power. Judging from the synopsis, I'm sorry if I'm completely wrong on this, but it seems like it's a family who've been living in this house for generations, and there's something about this house anyway, and it's related to two twins that live there, and one of the twins ends up disappearing. And it seems like it's not like she vanishes overnight. It seems like she slowly disappears. Maybe she disappears into the house is what I'm gathering, but maybe not. There's a good few different horror elements to this. Like apparently there's like vampire stuff in this as well. But when it comes to magical realism, I have a real issue, because a lot of the time I found previously reading other authors is that they will use the magical realism genre to basically cop out from writing a decent ending. That's how it comes across to me, that like you can get away with just not explaining everything. And sometimes it's fine having a book that's not explained, and you know, having that respect for the reader to make up their own mind on the information that you presented them with. However, other times it just comes across to me as like really lazy writing. So hopefully that's not my experience with this. Like I said, I've heard so many people talk about how brilliant this is. So I'm really hoping that I'm gonna absolutely love it. Next is one that I am so excited for. Like I have been hankering reading this book for such a long time, and I just can't wait to sink my teeth into it. It's The Hunger by Alma Katsu. So if you don't know anything about this book, I think it's basically a retelling of what the Donner Party experienced. If you don't know anything about the history of the Donner Party, basically it was this group of people who ended up getting stranded in like terrible weather in snow, and ended up eating each other. It's just a good old fashioned story of people eating, and I can't wait. I don't really read that much about cannibal stuff. I love the themes of like isolation and people turning against one another and all the paranoia that I expect to experience in this book. I can't wait for it. Then I have The Dark Dolan and Other Fantasies by Clark Ashton Smith. Now, I'm going to be straight up with you. I'm not too sure what this is actually about. I know it's a short story collection and there's also quite a bit of poetry in it, but I'm really not familiar with Clark Ashton Smith. I just know that he's gone on to inspire and influence a lot of other horror writers, but this is described as fantasy, horror and sci-fi. And the main story, The Dark Dolan, is described as a sword and sorcery story. So I don't know how much I'm actually going to enjoy it if there is a huge focus on fantasy. But like if it's dark fantasy, I feel like I can try to get into it. But so many of you have recommended me reading this over the years. And usually the sentiment of the comments telling me to read this author are, you ain't shit unless you read Clark Ashton Smith. So I am looking forward to not being an ignorant horror reader anymore anyway, that's for sure. Next, I have The Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. So this is the second book in the Farser trilogy. I read the first one earlier this year. It was this year. I'm pretty sure it was this year. I'm really confused. It seems like it's been a really long year. And I liked it. I liked the political aspects to it, but I felt like the pacing was a bit off in some places. But I've heard that the second book is where things get really, really interesting. So naturally, like the first book is all the setup, setting up the characters, setting up the world. If I give the second book a go, that's when I'll know whether I can actually say I like this series or not, and whether I'm going to finish it by reading the third one. So like at the end of the day, no harm done. Like I will read this at some point this coming year, probably when I'm really craving some fantasy, probably after I've read something like really dark and I just need something a bit more lighthearted to distract myself with. Next, I have Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. So I've been wanting to read this for a really long time yet again. I feel like I'm saying that for all of these books, but I have been. I really like Neil Gaiman's work. I don't read him terribly often, but only when like the mood really sets in. I've always really appreciated his work, but I've never read any Terry Pratchett, so I'm interested to see like what the two of them came up within this. And this is the story of the son of Satan being born and basically bringing on the apocalypse. And it's about an angel and a demon who team up together in order to stop the end of the world from happening, because they have a pretty cushy life here on Earth and they don't really want to see the end of it. So that sounds like it's going to be good crack, and I'm going to probably read it over the summer of 2021 at some point. Next, I have The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski. So this is the first book in the Witcher series, and it's a short story collection. So I believe that there's 7 short stories in total, and they're all through flashbacks. Basically, Geralt of Rivia is laying up somewhere trying to recover from a battle, and it's just him going through various memories of other adventures. I hear that it's a really great start to the series, and I watched the TV show last year. I'm currently playing through The Witcher 3. I'm really late on the bandwagon, and I just want to read the source material because it seems like it's going to be something that I'll enjoy. Next, I have The Children of Men by P.D. James. So this is quite ominous because the blurb on the back starts with, "The year was 2021. I don't want to hear anything bad about 2021. I barely survived 2020, for Christ's sake. This is a dystopian, and in the year 2021, the extinction of the human race seems to be imminent. 1995 was when the last human being was actually born. There's just this mass infertile issue across the entire world, and no one knows why it happened or what's going on. But I've seen the film adaptation of this, and I know the film adaptation is quite different to the book, although I've seen that P.D. James actually enjoyed the film adaptation, which I feel is kind of rare for an author to actually like the film adaptation of their story. So I know that the book takes a bit of a different route to get to the end of the story. I absolutely love dystopian stories, so much so that I was reading a lot last year and I had to actually stop myself because I was like, listen, you don't want to burn through all the great dystopian tales in one year. So I'm slowly but surely going to pace myself, and I'm really looking forward to finally getting to this since it is one of my favourite films. Then I have The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. So I've been really hankering reading more of Philip K. Dick's work recently. I read A Scanner Darkly last year and really enjoyed it despite how much it depressed me. And a couple of years ago I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. So I've been wanting to read The Man in the High Castle or anything else by him for a good while, and this is basically a reimagining of historical events as if the Allies didn't win World War II. So basically everyone's living under this Nazi dictatorship. I believe that there's parts of America that are controlled by Japan, and that's all I really know about it. I don't really know anything about like the cast of characters or where the story actually goes or anything like that. I imagine it's going to be, you know, a bit dark, naturally. It's one that I've heard so much about over the years, and it's been on the top of my to-read list for quite some time now, so I'm delighted to finally have it. Next, I have The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. Now, if you know me, you know that I absolutely adore Yoko Ogawa's writing. Everything that I've read by her has just taken my breath away. I think she's so creative, and her short story collection, Revenge, was so hardcore and so metal, and I just recommend everyone to pick that up. The Memory Police is a dystopian story. So originally it was published in 1994, but it was only recently in the last year or so translated into English. So you've probably seen this knocking around BookTube quite a lot because a good few people got it as PR and all that kind of thing. But it's about a novelist who lives on an island, and the island is under control by these people called the Memory Police. So there's some sort of like government organization, and what they do is that they remove objects from the island and cause people to forget them. And sometimes it's not just objects like a physical thing, sometimes it's actually people. So it sounds like it's going to be really dark. I can only imagine what Ogawa has in store for me in this one, but I am so excited. Like when I say I'm excited, I mean I'm genuinely like delighted and excited and ecstatic to finally have this and be able to read it after such a long time of seeing everyone else talk about it on BookTube. Next, I have 2 books by Hiromi Kawakami. So I have The Strange Weather in Tokyo and The Nakano Thrift Shop. So I think what happened here is that my mum must have thought that this was a series based on the covers, but they aren't. They're 2 standalone books. They both kind of have similar themes of like a little bit of romance and stuff. But I think that's why I ended up with 2 of them. I'm not angry. I'm delighted because I've wanted to read particularly The Strange Weather in Tokyo for quite some time now, and I've talked about it multiple times on my channel as a book that I really anticipate reading. So the fact that I have 2 of Kawakami's books is great. I'm delighted. So The Strange Weather in Tokyo is described as an old-fashioned May-December romance novel, and it has themes of isolation. So this is about a woman who's like 30 something, and she ends up getting in contact with one of her old teachers who's 30 years older than her, and they start up some sort of relationship. And then we have the Nakano Thrift Shop, which is about a woman who works in a thrift shop and all the other characters who work in the shop with her, but she ends up striking up some sort of romance with one of the other workers there. So they both sound like they'll just be decent palate cleansers after I've read something terribly disturbing, and I'm sure I'll enjoy them based on that. Next, I have Beloved by Toni Morrison. I should have probably included this in the classics area of the haul, but this was only published in 1987. But I feel like it is a modern classic, and that's how it's viewed as nowadays. So this is set around the Civil War in America, and it's about a woman who has escaped slavery, but she's still very much haunted by her past and the things that she's experienced in her life. And now she has a family, and she believes that she has been haunted by her deceased daughter, and it's quite dark and it's quite sad, and I think maybe those are issues that I've struggled with while reading it prior, that I've had a hard time getting into it because I'm just so reluctant to actually read something that's based in so much reality. However, this is an incredibly important novel and everyone should probably read it at some point, so I'm going to be reading it in the next few months, and I'll be telling you my thoughts about it when I finally get to it. Next, I have The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Now, you know, if you've been following me over the last year or two, I'm a huge fan of Joan Didion's writing. And this is a book all about grief. She wrote it after the death of her husband. And I believe that her daughter had started becoming ill during the writing of this, or just after her husband passed away. And I believe her daughter ended up passing away. I don't know if that is also depicted in this. And a lot of the time it's recommended to people after they've lost a loved one. So I'm going to be interested to see how I feel about reading it. I think it's not going to be for a while because, as you know, I have had my own bereavements this year. It's been a very rough year for me. I don't know if I'm emotionally ready to get into like someone else's grief while I'm still not even processing my own. I've heard nothing but wonderful things about this. Everyone who's read it like raves about how beautiful it is, and when I am ready to actually crack on with reading it, I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it just as much as they have. And then finally, the last book is The Year of the Monkey by Patti Smith. Now, I love Patti Smith. I have read all her books aside from this one. I saw her live about 2 years ago when she was over here supporting Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Had a good cry while she sang Because the Night, because she dedicated it to her husband. And if you've read M Train, you know like how brutal that is. I believe she took like a year out to just wander around, and she just wrote about it. Patti Smith could write about absolutely anything and I'll eat it up. I love her as a person so much. I love her as an artist, and as a writer, she's just like one of my all-time favorites, and everyone should read Just Kids and everyone should read M Train, and I'll probably be saying everyone should read Year of the Monkey when I'm finally finished with it. So yeah, that is that. So that has been my book haul. I hope you really enjoyed it. I didn't make this to be braggadocious or anything like that. I'm just genuinely jazzed to be sharing what I'm going to be reading in 2021. And I want to hear your thoughts. If you've read any of these, I want to hear your thoughts. If you got any interesting books for Christmas, so we can have a little chat down in the comments section. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I hope you enjoy this video, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.